Hey guys, time to get into an analysis of a new text. And before we do that, we should probably explore the historical context or the philosophical context of that text. So this time we're looking at a body theorist. Her name is Meredith Micheals. She's done a lot of work on personal identity. And what's really important is that she has kind of developed a new line of thinking, but we'll explore that in the future. Another thing I want to point out too is she's done a lot of work on women's rights, women's reproductive rights and feminist issues, and she's coming from a very modern context. So that might be useful to know. I'm just passing it on. So what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to look at previous positions that shape Micheals' thinking. Now when I say Micheals, that's her last name. It's really Meredith Micheals' thinking. Okay, so we're going to look not necessarily on positions that have determined her thinking or positions that when modified slightly are a position. No, we're looking at the previously held beliefs that she's responding to. That's what we're really doing, okay? To do that, we need to name and define these key terms of positions, and you should already know them. We also need to outline the relevant philosophical thoughts of these positions, and then we need to outline Micheals' responses, okay? So before we do all that, I need you to score yourself in these three success criteria. And then, pretty pleased with the cherry on top, can you draw a picture that represents the idea of a brain having some kind of continuity? What does a brain look like as it changes, as it rewires, as it restructures itself? And I'm pretty sure by the end of this video, you'll see the relevance between that APK and what Micheals' position is. Alright, cheers. Alright, so if you haven't already guessed, we're going to start by looking at the theorists that we've covered already, because they are pretty much the grand kingpins of the finite philosophical positions that you'll find yourself in, okay? So, Hume, when we finished off looking at Hume, suggests that the self really is some kind of illusion, which is perpetuated by custom, language, and the structures we use to make sense of sense data. So I guess cause and effect, relationships of resemblance, contiguity, that kind of thing. The thing we covered when we were looking at Hume. And he basically argues that, you know, we don't know if there really is a self, and the self is an illusion which is basically constructed by the imposition of these ideas, or these kind of associations, onto sense data, okay? And he says, look, after all, if we can't actually observe this fixed impression of what the self would be if it exists, then really, you know, all we can say is the self is just this bundle of sense data, impressions and ideas constantly changing. They're always in flux. So just take a note, because his position is a really good position. So this is what Hume thinks, and here's a bit of a summary of it, okay? Alright, the next video says, the next position is all about Locke. Now Locke is different. Like Descartes, Locke believes there's a thinking thing, right, behind the self. That's really important. It's a reasonable thinking thing. It's capable of being engaging in reason, and it's very, very self-reflective. It can see itself, it can present itself to itself, right? And it's in this thinking thing, that's where we find consciousness. And consciousness is because precisely the thinking thing is reasonable. It can engage in reason and it has the capacity to reflect. Well, consciousness is able to present itself to itself. It's able to see itself. It's able to be concerned for itself. And as long as that presentation happens in past, future and present memories, we start building a psychological continuity, provided it's the same consciousness that presents itself to itself. So in this case, the self is not an illusion. It's what happens when you maintain and start building a psychological continuity of memories, where the consciousness presents itself to itself in those memories, okay? So that's psychological continuity. Take a note. Alright, now it's also worth noting that in his theory of the self is not inside the body. Not at all, okay? And there's another theorist who's actually pretty big on the idea of the self, but we used him when we were looking at minds and bodies, and his name is Descartes. And for Descartes, well, really, all we need is just the thinking thing. And the thinking thing doesn't exist in the body. Okay, it exists in a transcendent immaterial world somewhere else, but it still has a substance and it still exists separately. The mind is a substance, it's a spiritual substance that lives in a spiritual plane, okay? But when we look at Locke, he argues there is this thinking thing, but the self really, it has to be a bit more. The self really is just this psychological continuity amongst memories, where the consciousness presents itself to itself, and that's where we really find the self, and it could exist in the thinking thing, okay? Alright, so we know that there are two kinds of theorists. We've got, well, what we call an illusion theorist, who argues that the self most likely is an illusion generated by a subjective construction of ideas designed to make sense of sense data. And then we've got soul theorists here, and we've got a memory or mind theorist right here. These guys believe that there is a self, and of course Hume believes, well, it's most likely an illusion, alright? So if we go down here, we need to really think about, well, okay, Hume, Locke, and Descartes have been the big kingpins of what we would call personal identity theory, or what is the self, what is personal identity, okay? And that's why I've got the big three kingpins of the Allies during the Second World War, just to create a kind of historical analogy, right? We know these are the guys, and we know these were the guys that were in charge of the Allies charging or campaigning against the Nazis, right? So that's why I put them there, alright? Now we can again give these guys all names. We can say that Hume belongs to, or Hume started or created the camp we call an illusion theory. So Hume is the father of the illusion theory camp. Locke is the father of the mind-memory camp, and Descartes, though it's a little misleading because really it's the thinking thing or the spiritual substance, we are, for the purposes of matching up with the textbook, we're going to call him the father of the soul theory camp. Now, the reason why we're putting him in the theory of the soul theory is because the mind is still a thing of substance that exists in an immaterial world, but it has a spiritual substance, so that's why we're giving him soul theory. Now, the theorist we're talking about, she kind of says, look, you're missing something key. Given all the innovation and the knowledge we have of the 20th century in science, maybe it's really important that we look at this idea of continuity of bodies and brains and see how much that contributes to the self. Now, I can't find anywhere an image of Meredith Micheals. I've looked for it again and again in Google Images, just can't find it. So I'm going to use one of her famous books that she wrote with another feminist author. It's called The Mummy Myth, and that's just going to highlight who she is, okay, from now on. So, she basically said, if we look at the body, we've got a rather large part of the story here that can't be ignored. And traditionally, when we look at, well, theorists of personal identity, they have ignored the body. The body's been completely irrelevant. And this belongs to a tradition that goes way back to Plato. That the material or the corporal or the body needs to be rejected because it's just incomplete and imperfect. Well, her suggestion is, well, actually, maybe it might not necessarily be the sum total of what the self is, but we just can't dismiss the role that the body and the continuity of the body and the continuity of the brain has in shaping our identity as well, okay? So, let's go back to our 3 success criteria. Did we name and define 3 key terms? Yes, we did. We looked at soul theory, mind, memory theory, and illusion theory, and now we've got a 4th, which is what we'll call body or continuity of body and brains theory, okay? We should all really know what they are. Have we outlined the philosophical thoughts? Well, yeah, we have. We've looked at Descartes, Hume, and Locke, looked at their philosophical thinking, and we pretty much now understand how Micheals has shaped her response to those theories. She said you've ignored the body when it comes to developing a theory of self. Alright, so I hope you've taken notes on everything, lots of visual representations. I'm going to put an exam-like question up, and I hope everything goes well. Cheers!